Now, Dan Andrews must be feeling the heat, despite what the polls are saying about a comfortable Labor victory. Why else would the Premier indulge in the divisive, dangerous and disingenuous game of calling his opponents extremists, white supremacists and Nazis?
Nazis. That's who's getting preferences from the Liberal Party. They are preferencing Nazis, people who are not just anti-Semites, but they are Nazis.
Preferencing Nazis are preferencing extremists.
That was Deputy Premier Jacinta Allen joining in the smears. But let's hear more from Dan.
The Liberal Party are preferencing racists, they are preferencing extremists, they are preferencing, black-shirted women haters, they are preferencing Nazis. All of it needs to be explained by the alternative government.
Anti-Defamation Commission Chairman Davir Abramovich has called on Dan Andrews to retire the Nazi analogies once and for all. And he also said, if we're going to be using the term Nazis, we need to have clear evidence that there are neo-Nazis and white supremacists who are running for Parliament. Joining me now is President of the Australian Jewish Association, Dr David Adler. Dr Adler, what is your reaction to Dan Andrews repeatedly calling his political opponents Nazis and white supremacists?
Rita, it's absolutely disgraceful, and this has to be one of the lowest points in Australian political discourse, and I don't think that's exaggerating it. It is grossly reprehensible on a number of levels. It's damaging, and the appropriation of Nazism or the Holocaust for domestic political point scoring is something that should be totally condemned. There is nothing remotely in Australia that resembles the call for a genocide of a whole race. It is trivialising, it is distorting the Holocaust. And on another level, the vagueness of his smear needs to be called out. And I'm surprised that some of our journalists have let him off fairly lightly. He refuses to name who these Nazis are, and that in itself is a scandal as well. So I think, to put it less than mildly, it shows a morality that really brings into question whether Dan Andrews is fit to be a leader. If he's got to sink to that level to smear in political debate, not to be accountable, not to provide evidence, I think it's a total disgrace, frankly.
Well, the Premier doesn't seem to be backing off. Let's look at some of his recent Twitter posts. He posted this. He said, "I want to be very clear. Nazis, racists and bigots have no place in politics. They have no place in our parliament and they have no place in our state. The Liberal Party are actively supporting candidates who espouse those views. I'm not going to name them. I'm not going to give them the satisfaction of airtime. I mean, but I'm going to call it out. This is what's at stake this election." Now, again, why is the Premier indulging in these dangerous political games? And the fact that he's not naming them, surely if there is a neo-Nazi, a white supremacist, a genuine bigot on the ballot, the first thing you do is identify who they are and warn people not to support them.
And provide evidence. It reminds me, for any students of even recent political history, that during the Cold War, the way you would smear opponents would be to call them communists. It doesn't matter if you don't have any evidence, just the smearing. So I think this should backfire on Premier Dan Andrews. I hope that the people of Victoria, whatever they think of the issues, do make a judgment on this. I know the election is not going to turn on this particular smear, but it does say something about the character. Now, who he is referring to, we can only guess. Perhaps he's trying to imply that the smaller parties that are right of centre have either anti-Semitic or Nazi-type views. Now, our experience and the evidence is that almost the reverse is the case. We're familiar with a number of the smaller parties. The UAP in Melbourne, for example, has an Orthodox Jewish candidate, Leon Kofmansky, who heckled the Premier at one event. The Liberal Democrat Party in New South Wales has as their number 2 candidate, Daniel Lukowitz, who is also part of the Jewish community. Even One Nation, say in South Australia, their sole representative in the South Australian Parliament is Sarah Game, a Jewish woman. So you can
And
go
Dr
through
Adler,
them.
and you've also got the case where Labor preference the Greens, and as we know, the Greens have a lot of BDS types amongst them. So Dan Andrews would just want to be careful about some of these smears and what people could accuse Labor of doing. Dr David Adler, thank you so much for joining me this evening.